The Committee on Municipal Oversight and Elections is called to order. The Secretary. Okay, go ahead, staff, if you will explain HB 2560.
Madam Chair and members, House Bill 2560 requires the county recorder to provide and the Secretary of State to post specified election information, including a list of persons who voted in the election, all ballot images used to tabulate the election results, and the cast vote record. Madam Chair, there is an amendment I can explain.
Please explain the amendment.
Madam Chair and members, the one-page amendment in your name dated February 7th at 8:42 a.m. modifies the definition of cast vote record and states that voters who are protected under the law will be included on the list by total number only. Additionally, the amendment specifies that posted ballot images must be unaltered. With that, I'm available for questions.
Do we have any questions for staff? Mr. Speaker Toma is the sponsor of the bill, and he's asked Senator Ken Bennett, who's sponsoring a mayor bill in the Senate, to speak on his behalf. So we'll go ahead and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members. Ken Bennett, representing Legislative District 1, and I served for 6 years as the Secretary of State, and since Rose Mofford passed a few years ago, I think I'm the one that's overseen more elections in the state of Arizona than any other person alive, which puts me in a unique position to try to address something that I think is very important in our society. You know, every day we begin our work pledging our allegiance to the flag and the republic that it represents. And I believe that the most important aspect of being a republic is representing the people who put us in a variety of different positions, and them knowing that the people that are elected and put into the positions that represent them were done so correctly and accurately. And when the voters lose confidence in that process, we teeter on the brink of losing our entire country, our republic. Some call it a democracy, whatever you want to call it, but in my mind, it's our country and it's at risk. Senate Bill 2560 intends to make our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified. And it does so by doing 4 things. It says that every time a county conducts an election, it will produce publicly 4 pieces of information, 1 before the election and 3 after, that in my opinion, and with the opinion of many others, and I'm very honored to have Secretary of State Fontes here with me today in support of the bill, and many others that I've worked with for years. And even though they are of a different party than me, I don't think this is a partisan issue. We have got to come together somehow as Republicans and Democrats in Arizona to make our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verifiable. And so the 4 things that this bill will require the counties to do, before the election, produce a list of who is eligible to vote in that election. In Arizona, we cut off voter registration 29 days before an election. So we know for more than 4 weeks before the election who's eligible to vote in the election. And the voter list is really already public information. If you have a few $100s in almost any county and as little as about $600 statewide, you can get the voter list in its entirety already. But this would publish the list of who's eligible to vote in the upcoming election, including inactive voters, who often get overlooked. The other 3 documents that are reported to the public are after the election. And the second of them is a list of who voted. Now, everybody on the who voted list should have been on the eligible to vote list. And between those 2 lists, we can verify that nobody is either registered or voting more than 1 time each. The third document that is, or the third piece of information that is called for in this bill is the release of the ballot images. There should be 1 ballot image, no more, no less, for everyone on the who voted list. And then the 4th document is what's called the cast vote record. And the cast vote record is basically the tabulation spreadsheet. And the ballot images and the cast vote record do not identify a voter in particular. But together, they allow anyone who wants to verify the election to look at the ballot images and the cast vote record and see that the votes were tabulated correctly. The cast vote record essentially works like a spreadsheet. And as you know, a spreadsheet has rows and columns. The rows on the cast vote record correspond with a ballot image. If you have the ballot image and the cast vote record, you don't know who voted any particular ballot or any particular row recorded in the cast vote image or in the cast vote record, but you can look at ballot number 692 and you can go to row 692 in the cast vote record and you can see that on ballot 692 image there's a vote for Smith and Jones and Garcia. You can go to the cast record, row 692, and see that votes for Smith and Jones and Garcia were recorded. And then you can add up the columns in the cast vote record and see that Garcia was awarded 12,000 votes, and that's what the county reported to us in the official canvass. Now there's many aspects in the bill to do some very important things. One of them is to protect the identity of any particular voter. I believe in many conversations I've had with many of you that we can probably improve that and do even more as we move this bill through. But we want to make sure that the list of the voters is limited to name, street address, I think is in the bill right now, and precinct. I think birth year is in there just to make sure that we don't have a junior and a senior, John Smith Jr. and senior at the same address, and somebody think, well, we've got a duplicate voter when in fact they are, one's born in 1940 and the other's born in 1960. But there might be some other ways to make sure that we are not seeing duplicate voters or thinking we're seeing duplicate voters without getting the birth year. We're not trying to do anything in any aspect of this bill to breach the confidentiality of voters, especially as they're tied to any particular ballot. We're not trying to do anything in this bill to allow anyone to reverse engineer anything in the cast vote record back to a particular ballot, and by knowing what precinct it came from and how many ballot styles were used in that precinct, figure out who voted. I've talked with Representative Turek and others about Braille voters. You know, we have a few dozen Braille voters every year. We're not trying to identify anything. So you'll see in the bill aspects of combining small precincts in with larger ones so that nobody can reverse engineer back to the identity of any particular voter and how they voted. If the threshold, I think it's 10 in the bill right now, is too small, then let's work on amendments throughout this process to make this bill even better. It is my belief and my publicly stated goal that I want this bill to earn the support of 2/3 to 3/4 of both caucuses in both the House and the Senate. And if we do that, we have probably done something magic in this country as far as coming together to do something that makes our elections transparent, trackable, and publicly verified so that people can have confidence that the people who voted were eligible to vote. There's a ballot for everyone who voted, and the tabulation spreadsheet adds up everything correctly, and we're not divulging any confidentiality of how any specific voter voted. As I said, I'm honored to have Secretary Fontes with me. I hope, Madam Chair, you'll call him next, but I will stand for any questions of the members. Thank you.
Excellent. Any any members for the bill sponsor?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
Senator Bennett, I just want to thank you, first of all. We've had many conversations about this, and I appreciate your willingness to have those conversations and to really try and get this in a place where it's the strongest that can possibly be. So I know you and I have talked about this before, but I want to, for everyone, I want to revisit that issue of visually impaired voters and explain my concern there. So with the Braille ballot, that's going to need to be duplicated. And if we're putting both of those into the system and we can see, kind of a duplication, it doesn't matter how large of a bundle we'd be able to put those voters into, we would still be able to find them. So for example, if I had a bundle of 5,000 voters and I have one visually impaired voter and I can see which precinct they're in, then if I happen to see them walking on the street with their guide dog or their walking stick, I would then know how they voted. So we've talked about moving them into the category of protected voters. Are there other people beyond just visually impaired voters who we might be able to identify? This is a bill that my strong preference would have been that we would have had even more time with, because I think it's really important that we're very, very, very thoughtful and very careful about how we're addressing privacy. So are there other categories of voters who you think potentially could fall into that we need to be mindful of moving forward?
Madam Chair, Representative, absolutely. The bill, for example, calls for voters protected as far as judges and police officers and law enforcement and prosecutors. Anybody who is a protected voter right now would have their names not even reported individually or redacted. They would just be done in a group in the voter lists. To put a little bit of numbers to that, and this isn't directly to your question, Representative Harris, but in Maricopa County, out of about 2.6 million registered voters, there's about 4,800, I think, that are protected, identity protected voters. Specifically to the address confidentiality program, which is battered women or spouses or anybody like that, I think it's a few thousand statewide at this point. So out of 4.3 million registered voters statewide, the protected voters is less than probably 8,000 total. And they would be reported as totals. As far as the Braille or blind ballots, Representative Turek, Madam Chair, the categories of ballots that I've seen as I've administered elections around the state, you've got the Braille ballots, which frankly, it does no good to try to show the Braille ballot itself. Because if you look at a Braille ballot, it's about the size of a cookbook, and it's blank paper as you look directly at it until you feel it and sense that there's some raised holes that are the Braille. So putting an image of a Braille ballot doesn't make sense anyway. And so that needs to be carved out in an amendment yet to be part of the bill. And I would welcome one from you or anyone else to work on that aspect. As I think through the other groups of ballots that are dealt with in an election, you've got large print ballots. I don't think there's any aspect of whether a voter has requested a large print ballot that on its surface would tell somebody that, oh, that's the one or two people in the Maple precinct that gets large print ballots. There's actually not very many large print ballots requested, but if there's a few thousand of them, I don't think they self-identify themselves out on the street when you're walking by with a assist animal or whatever they have. There's provisional ballots that probably need to be thought through very carefully to make sure that anybody who voted provisionally and was determined to be an authentic voter and allowed to vote, we don't want to expose them in any way. But the Braille ballots is the most obvious one that I think needs to be kind of grouped or combined in, maybe with the protected voters, so that we don't have any. We have this number in the last election, 2022. I think there were 1.9 million or 2.1 million votes statewide, and we're talking about a few thousand people in all of these various categories. And if they're lumped together in number only, along with the list of voters who is already public information that they're registered voters at certain addresses, then we might have 2.1 million names of voters and 4,000 or 5,000, the number of 4,000 or 5,000 others who are in these protected categories for whatever reasons, and then we have the same number of ballot images, and nothing can be tied to any one person.
Any other questions for the speaker?
Chairwoman, Representative, I have a question.
Yes,
Well, I have a
Representative.
statement and a question. So I'm registered to vote because you sent me a letter when I was 18 years old wishing me happy birthday. So
Thank you.
just to break some ice there. But I'm very curious about this bill because I know you were also part of the Cyber Ninjas audit, and so I'm just kind of curious, how were you guys counting ballots during that audit, and how will this bill make that different?
Madam Chair, Representative, I was not part of the audit. I was asked by the Senate to be the liaison to the audit. So I had no decision-making authority as to how the audit was conducted.
Okay.
But if I had some authority as to how the audit should have been conducted, it would have been to use some of the fundamental aspects of what we have here. And that is, look at the ballot images and make sure that they are all correctly recorded in the cast vote record.
Yeah.
That probably more than anything else should have given people confidence that, well, and then comparing the number of ballot images. I mean, we looked at 2,089,563 ballots in that election in Maricopa County. The focus of the auditors, they chose to make it to the paper ballots, and it really doesn't matter whether it's, I mean, there should be the same number of paper ballots as there are ballot images that are scanned from those paper ballots as they go through the machine. But we found we were looking for 2,089,563 ballots, and we found 2,089,654 ballots. We found within 900 and some odd total ballots, and we found in the votes for president within 350 votes of what the county had told us a few months earlier.
Yeah.
That fundamental finding got, I think, overshadowed by a lot of other things that kind of came up in the process. And so I think the aspects of what we're trying to do here is what will help most Arizonans know that the people that voted were eligible to vote. There's a ballot image, no more, no less, for the number of people that voted, and the tabulation spreadsheet on which they were added up was done correctly. There's some other things that need to be dealt with in our elections, making sure signature verification is done better, and cleaning up our voter rolls, and all kinds of other things. But one of the fundamental things to cleaning up our voter rolls is about 2 weeks or whatever we decide, it says 10 days in this legislation, before every election, just print a list of who's registered to vote. I can go to Yavapai County and in a precinct and look on a particular address, or in a 2150 UN Drive, I should find Kenneth Roy Bennett and Jane Bennett. And if that's what I find, fine. If I find Kenneth Roy and Kenneth R. and Kenny and Ken and Ken Roy, then we got a problem.
Yeah. A follow-up question is, also during the audit, there was concerns that there was a voter information that was taken to the person running the audit. So would you be willing to add some security measures on here to make sure that if this does become a bill, we aren't, people who are being contracted to audit an election are not mishandling our information?
Madam Chair, Representative, absolutely. And in fact, I don't think it's reflected in the form of an amendment yet, but I would like to see the Class 1 misdemeanor that's in the bill right now risen to a Class 5 felony for anybody who tries to alter ballot images or misuse them. Because in ARS 16, that governs most of our other election functions, most violations of those functions are stipulated as a Class 5 felony.
Well, I would like to add, anyone
Okay,
who's
let's go through the
chairwoman.
chair. Thank you.
If we could add, anyone who is contracted with the state to oversee if an audit does happen again.
Madam Chair, Representative, I'd be happy to add that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the speaker? Oh, yes, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Senator Bennett, thank you so much. I do have one question on the actual bill itself. On page 1, section A, number 4, it talks about a person shall not use for commercial purposes a voter list that is published or posted pursuant to the section. How is this portion going to be enforced if someone is doing so?
Well, I might steal a little bit of thunder from the Secretary, but There are some things that we can and should do at the Secretary of State level and or the county recorder's levels so that when these lists are made available, there's some ways to tell who's abusing the list,
Okay.
for lack of a... And I'll just leave it at that because I don't think we want to stipulate in statute everything that we're doing to protect voters and protect these lists and find out who abuses them. But I know in conversations with the Secretary and others that there's ways to do that, and we ought to make every effort to do that.
Thank you. Any other questions for the bill sponsor? Senator, before we let you go, there's an amendment on this bill. I believe it just does some technical corrections, and that it also it updates the definition to cast vote record, and then also does a few like minor technical things. Did you want to say anything about that before
Yes,
we let
Madam
you go?
Chair, thank you very much. I believe the amendment is essentially to make the bill identical to the bill that we're running in the Senate. So there's probably going to be an amendment to 1324 in the Senate, and those two amendments together will make 2560 and 1324 identical. But members, especially my Democrat friends on this side of the dais, this is not what I hope you would consider supporting today in its final form. What I ask humbly of each of you is to support moving this to the next level so that we can work on all of these questions that are coming up and many others. I've got senators on the other side of the aisle in the Senate that I'm working with who have some very good ideas about how to stipulate in statute the publishing of these lists at either the county recorder's level or the Secretary of State's, and instead maybe make it you get the list by applying for the list, and there's no money involved, but at least you have filled out your name and address and email, and you've signed an attestation that you're not going to abuse it, and a few things like that. So there may be some very valid improvements that we want to consider throughout the process. My goal is to get 25 out of 30 votes in the Senate and 50 out of 60 here in the House, and have that broadly bipartisan, and then I think we can get it signed by the governor.
And thank you, Senator. Is there anyone else before we go to the room who has any questions for the senator on the bill or the amendment? Okay, seeing none, Mr. Vice
Thank you,
Chair.
Madam Chair and members.
Thank you, Mr. Senator Bennett. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please call the first speaker?
First speaker for the Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Adrian Fontes. I'm the Arizona Secretary of State. And I want to start with a very clear moment in time. And that is January of 2017. And I want us all to go back very momentarily to what it was we all thought about elections in 2017, January, and what we all thought about ballot images in January of 2017. That's when I first wanted ballot images published. And I want to make very, very clear here that there are points of policy that may have existed far before recent controversies have so divided folks when it comes to the mechanical and practical administration of elections. This is one of those moments. The issue is incredibly important to me, and it's, I think, far greater than we're going to be able to discuss here in the limited amount of time that, Madam Chair, you've granted. And I hope to engage in a comprehensive conversation with all of you about the concerns that you have, about the concerns of your constituencies, because I think that there's a lot of important stuff that needs to be covered. We've already, Madam Chair and Mr. Vice Chair, we've already had conversations about some stuff, and I hope that those conversations leave you in a place to know that I come in good faith, and obviously my conversations in relationship with the Senator, former Secretary Bennett, should bolster that. Before I move forward with the particular points, the address confidentiality program in Arizona currently contains 2,446 names. I know that question was asked. I don't know who asked that question. I'm sorry. Yes, Representative Harris. Representative Tarek, there are not just Braille ballots or large form ballots. We have some ballots that are delivered orally for some of our non-sighted voters. We have some of those that are delivered orally in a variety of languages. We have some that are some ballots use ballot marking devices. For example, if a voter does not have use of their hands or arms, they can use the same types of sip and puff technology that we see some folks operating mobility devices in. We also have some forms of ballot that come from our Uniform Overseas Civilian American Voter Act, the UOCAVA voters who are perhaps stationed with the State Department overseas, and so a variety of different forms of ballot come to the county. So we certainly want to consider all of those very specific forms as we move forward with this bill. I wanted to clarify some of those points before I move to some of the reasons why I support this. Now, so long as this bill does, I think some of the things that I've discussed, I'll run through these quickly, and it does do this. It does protect the identity of voters, particularly voters who are law enforcement, judges, participants in the address confidentiality program, and so forth. That is explicitly listed in this bill. I think one of the particular items here is the actual manipulation of the ballots by someone who is not a certified election officer. That is a clear violation of federal law, and I think we have to pay close attention to the overlap of federal law and state law here, and so we need to be very careful about how the ballots are handled, the physical ballots are handled, because I think there's a small portion in here that contemplates that, and who is not only eligible on those even-numbered years November ballots. Now, that doesn't speak to school district ballots, maybe in a May election or a March election for municipal offices, but these are particulars that we have to pay attention to. Additionally, and the Secretary, you weren't stealing any of my thunder, but for the protection of voters and to allow law enforcement to have better investigative tools to find out whether or not these lists have been moved into the commercial space. There are some techniques that I'll be happy to discuss. Eventually, they may need to be moved into statutory language, but for security purposes and to not publicly at this stage reveal any law enforcement investigative techniques, I'll reserve any further commentary for those, but those have been contemplated. The other thing I want to make sure that there's three other particular points. I support this bill, number one, because it allows specifically for the county recorders to implement these. Now, granted, we've got to make sure that they've got the resources necessary to do this work. And so I will, as an aside, implore this committee and every other committee that all of you sit on, particularly appropriations, to make sure that the counties have the money that they need to actually do the things that we're demanding of them, including properly staffing the departments that have shown that a lack of staffing can lead to real problems. We only have to look back towards the last election in Pinal County to see that that's real. These provisions, mostly, except for staffing, can be executed at not too much cost for most counties, although some of the county systems need to have some adjustments made to them. We can certainly provide more information on a county-by-county basis to the committee or to this House of the Legislature as needed. And there's one other aside that I want to mention that I learned back in January of 2017, right after I first got elected to be Maricopa County Recorder. And it goes back to the first point that I made. I was at a conference for local election, state and local election officials. I can't remember exactly where. And I was sitting after hours enjoying an adult beverage with a person who had worked as an election administrator in 3 different states and then eventually for the United Nations observing elections proceedings across the globe. And he indicated to me that there was one place in the world where 98% of the voters had very high confidence in the outcome of their elections. One place at the time that he spoke to. And I said, that's amazing. Where is it and why? He said, well, this place actually publishes their ballots online by precinct so that the population can go count it their doggone selves. I don't know if that was the exact language, but I know this is a committee, so I'll be proper. And that place is Mongolia. We're not the only jurisdiction that's contemplating this or that is doing this. There are several other jurisdictions, both statewide and otherwise, across the United States of America that are publishing their ballot images, and they don't have any real issues. And I will not diminish concerns by saying that the hand-wringing about this is much ado about nothing. What I will say is this: I'm very, very proud to be standing here with former Secretary Bennett, who is part of that small family of folks who've actually administered elections in their lifetime. I consider him not just a colleague in this endeavor, but a subject matter expert. I hope, like heck, Madam Chair and all of the members here, you will advance this into a greater conversation, a more substantive conversation, so that we can actually get something done here that I truly believe, or I wouldn't be standing here before you talking about it, will increase not only our voters' confidence in our system, but that public verifiability that so many people are looking for across the political spectrum. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. Any questions? Any questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none. Oh, go ahead.
Mr. Secretary, you mentioned 2017, and I want to take us back to 2017, which is when this House passed a bill that effectively banned digital images of ballots from being produced, and it passed that bill unanimously. And so I suppose I want you to explain to this committee why this House should reverse itself and what has changed between 2017, where every single member from both parties, every single county in the state decided that this was, I suppose, a bad idea, to today when this should be a good idea.
Madam Chair, Representative, thank you very much for that question. It's a great question, and that's because just prior to that, in 2016, Pima County won a lawsuit against some folks who wanted ballot images published, and that was an insurance policy so that no other counties with that capacity would be subject to the same type of a lawsuit if they tried to go ahead and publish ballot images. With all due respect to the current members and even those past members, I don't know that that was a well-advised bill. But the rationale has absolutely nothing to do with ballot images. It has to do with protecting the state from further lawsuits and further expenses thereunder.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Additional follow-up?
Nope.
Okay.
Just
Any other?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions for the speaker? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got to run. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming today.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, will you please call the next speaker?
First speaker.
At our next